Oh, hello Digmates! It's Dominique, and today we have great news. The first 100 Defy units have been assembled and soon we'll start assembly of the next few thousand. Manel even came back from China with 2 of them, 1 black and 1 silver. So, let's gaze upon their magnificent beauty. It hasn't been an easy ride. We found a few things that we want to iron out for mass production. So join us in a new episode of the Dygma News Special. Tales from the Factories. PCB Test Delirium. It all started a month ago when Stefan, our senior electronic engineer, arrived in China to oversee the production of the first batch of PCBs. He had to ensure those PCBs were assembled correctly and instilled robust procedures for mass production. All PCBs go through a jig that flashes the firmware and tests that everything works. He began with the key scanner and the underglow PCBs, which were supposed to be the easy ones. But it got scary pretty fast. Our procedure is synced online so we can remotely check the PCBs being tested. And the first time we did it, half the PCBs were failing the tests. Stefan ran to the factory, fearing the worst, but it turned out it was a problem with the software that did the tests. Most of the PCBs failed the test on the first try, but passed on the second. However, it was recorded as a failed PCB. We made some changes to the software and fixed the problem, but it took a while for our hearts to recover. That was the scariest bit. We made other adjustments to the different procedures like the tests of the RF PCBs and the neurons for the wired and wireless version. But overall, we're delighted with how the PCBs are coming together. Those PCBs are already assembled in the first batch of 100 keyboards and mass production is underway. Travel Case Rebellion. As Stefan was leaving, Manel, our lead product designer, arrived to oversee the first assembly run and implement the necessary protocols for mass production. Of course, we would still need someone to supervise the process afterwards. Aitor, our supply chain manager, will step in and be responsible for monitoring every step they take. Manel began to inspect the keyboard from top to bottom, starting with the travel case, which, to be fair, has come out pretty nicely. However, he found some scenarios where the top lid that holds the cables wouldn't stay closed. After some testing, he realized that it was due to the cables not being properly folded inside, so we would need to keep an eye on that. Keycaps Oblivion. You might not remember this, but in our last update, we told you we had all the keycaps for the first 100 keyboards. Well, it turns out that we didn't. The supplier had fixed the problem with the injection process because some keycaps were shrinking too much. But then he decided to wait for Manel to validate another set of samples before laser etching the keycaps. We were a bit annoyed at first, but given that the keycaps were mostly done, this actually helped us polish some minor details of the legends. So we're happy that they waited after all. Currently, we have more than 500 sets done and mass production is moving forward. Pam Hell. Don't be dismayed by their enticing looks and satisfying tactility, because these babies hide hell underneath their beautiful skin. The biggest issue we found is that the seam of the base isn't perfect, and we want perfect. Palm pad is made of silicone wrapped in leatherette and glued to a plastic bed. If the folding or the gluing is imperfect, some gaps appear on the edge. We're working with this with our supplier, and in the worst case scenario, we'll make more and more palm pads and simply disregard those that don't make it past our quality control. Top Panel Purgatory. The only issue that worried us was the texture of the top panel finish. Some samples were too rough to the touch. Manel was adamant about this, so our supplier improved the brushing and the anodizing process. Now, all the top panels have a smooth finish. We also found a little issue with the holes for the low profile switches. On the Dygma Rays, those switches were tough to pull out. So we made the cutouts on the top panel a tiny bit larger on the Defy, but now they're a bit loose. It's nothing serious, but just be careful when pulling out a low profile keycap. White plastic infiltration. Now let's check the keyboard's base, where a few other feats await us. One of the funniest ones had to do with the plastic base of the silver keyboards. While Manel was inspecting one of the Defy keyboards, he noticed that the LEDs shone through the plastic. It's kind of understandable because the LEDs we use are blinding, but that base should be opaque. It turns out they had messed up the plastic mixture. Fortunately, we caught it on time, and since making plastic injection components is fast, we fixed them right away. Tenting legs, Guerrilla Wars. However, the most significant challenge awaited. Hundreds of tenting legs spread on the table awaited Manel's inspection. In his thoroughness, he not only visually checked for imperfections in the paint and inaccuracies in the shapes and sizes, but also inspected how well the rubber tips were attached to the aluminum. He ripped a few apart, and we hypothesized two things. He's actually the Hulk, or the glue was not gluing. Nobody wanted to test the first hypothesis for some reason, so we assumed it was the glue. After some investigation, we discovered that the supplier had switched a faster drying glue which clearly wasn't doing the job. We made them switch back to a slower drying glue, and problem solved. Tunto na supplier. With that fixed, it was time to assemble the legs of the keyboards. But after completing just 20 keyboards, all of them had wobbling issues. All. Manel sat down with the workers to understand what was happening. It turned out to be an accumulation of little things. Most of the time, it had to do with the base not being perfectly attached to the top panel, so the keyboard was not completely flat. In other cases, the tenting legs were a bit twisted, or the tip was inadequately glued, so replacing them solved the issue. After fixing them and a few other small things, all 20 keyboards had zero wobbling issues. Yay! Another little thing we discovered was that the top rods, these things, they were a bit too loose. This is due to the little changes we made to the hinges, but we could fix it by modifying the mold of these plastic rods. That will be ready for mass production, but for the first 100 keyboards, we've added a thin ring to make it feel more secure. To finish the tenting legs Guerrilla Wars, we found a minor collision with one of the side legs. It's nothing critical, as you usually need to pull the side leg first and then the tenting leg second, but we'll slightly change its shape to avoid a collision. The Neuron Fusion. Finally, another problem we faced was related to the slot where you insert the neuron to switch to Bluetooth mode. We wanted that to feel seamless and smooth, but it turned out that some were tough to pull out. For example, this black one is okay, but for the silver version, it's too hard. David, can you try it? Try it. Oh wow, you're so strong. We tried multiple solutions, including a special lubricant used for submarine electronics. But in the end, we realized that this only happens when the neuron is plugged in all the way, much more than needed for a firm connection. So we'll make some changes to ensure it's not plugged in all the way, and that way everything works perfectly. The neuron stays connected, but you don't need the Hulk or David to pull it out. So what now? Assembly of the first 100 Defy units has finished this week. They'll be air freighted to Spain next week, a week later than expected. They should arrive at our warehouse in Valencia by the last week of June or the 1st of July. Then we'll do the final quality control assembly, like putting the right switches, and ship them to you. In the meantime, we'll finish mass producing all the components and start the final assembly. This should be completed by mid-July. Then we ship them to Spain, some by air and some by sea, and final fulfillment will commence in August and maybe September, given the 1-week delay. As I mentioned, our supply chain manager will oversee the whole operation in China, but there are still some uncertainties. Right now, the main risk for delays is the lead time for the electronics, as they're a key component for the assembly. If things like the keycaps or even the palm pads and tenting legs are delayed, we can work around that. On the other hand, you can only do so much pre-assembly without the electronics, especially the key scanner, which is the first thing you attach to the top panel. The next batches of PCBs should arrive in the next 2 weeks, and they should all be done by early July. But any delay will directly affect assembly. But let's not forget the good news. The first 100 Defy keyboards have come out of the factory and look fantastic. In a few weeks, we'll be shipping them to you, our early backers, and we can't wait to start seeing pictures of the Defy on your desks. As always, we'll keep you posted on how manufacturing goes, so don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when we publish a video. Next up, scientists are shocked as study reveals that cats are secretly running an underground pizza delivery service. More on that tonight.